Hey, welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. We're in the Hall of Faith. This is our 10th installment of the Hall of Faith. This is about Moses. Last week we began looking at Moses from the Old Testament, specifically how he exhibited extraordinary faith, and as brought up by the author of the book of Hebrews in chapter 11. The writer of Hebrews begins chapter 11 by describing faith. We've seen this before. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. This is what the Old Testament men and women were commended for. So I began to talk about Moses and spent most of the time in his early years, how he was spared being put to death at birth like all other Hebrew boys, how he came to become Egyptian royalty, and then talked about the wonderful life he was having by the world's standards as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. As the son, he was in a position to, quote, enjoy the pleasures of sin, unquote. We talked about what his life was like. We just started to explore what the author of Hebrews meant when he wrote in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. So we noted last week, one of Moses' choices, his choice was, I'm going to put it up there, his choice was refusing the pleasures of sin. So we know him to be 40 years old when he made this choice. And what did he have to choose from? A choice between, as it says, being mistreated versus enjoying the pleasures of sin. He refused the worldly choice of pleasures. And that brings us up to where we'll start today. Let's continue in Exodus chapter 2. That's where we're getting a lot of Moses' story. Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. One day after Moses had grown up, remember he's 40 years old. We find that out from Stephen in the New Testament. Paul wrote about Stephen. He went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So Moses kills a guy. Notice it's not in the heat of the moment. He does look around, you see that. True, he hid the dead body. He would prefer it not be known. But we'll read in the next verses, the killing becomes known. I had to ask myself, is there really a choice here? Did he really choose to give up the good life? Or were the choices made for him by that one death? What does it mean that he chose? Because it does say that. He chose. First of all, notice the phrase, his own people, was used twice there. If you're an Egyptian, a Pharaoh's grandson, this is huge. Taking any kind of interest in slaves, these Hebrews, is not something an Egyptian does. So Moses is affiliating himself with the Hebrews. That is a big choice. He's not only giving up the choice of all the pleasures of sin and just the good life, the worldly life, but he is choosing to no longer be an Egyptian, but to be with God's chosen people, to be affiliated with them, the Hebrews. I would guess it wasn't an easy choice. All those material benefits of an Egyptian life versus where his heart is. And now add a spiritual component. These are God's people. These are God's chosen. His decision, his choice, was before the killing. By thinking of Hebrews as his people, he's turned his back on enjoying the pleasures of sin. In his heart, he's already chosen, he's already closed the door on his good life. So he did choose a life of misery. Why is that a life of misery? Or was it called misery there? To be mistreated. We'll see the word misery a little bit later. He chose to be mistreated because that, by affiliating himself with the Hebrews, he is casting himself with the lot of the slaves. Okay. Circumstances do develop where Moses' heart leads him to a dangerous action. He's avenging a kinsman. In his mind, that's a kinsman. Even though he's an Egyptian, he knows that he is really one of the Hebrews. Remember, he was raised by his mother and father until he went to become the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. And during that time, he learned all about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the Hebrew people. So by that one act, with whether discovered or not, he sealed the deal on his choice. So as I say, he's choosing to affiliate himself with the Hebrews. Included in that connection would be a life of mistreatment. Now let's go to verse 25 of Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, again, let's look at that. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. So, I'd like to suggest this another choice he's making, which is to be willing to suffer. Moses was willing to suffer. And now let's look at the next verse, verse 26 in Hebrews chapter 11. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as far greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. So, verse 25 says he chose to be mistreated along with the chosen people of God. In verse 26, he picked disgrace over material things, the treasures of Egypt. But this verse 26 is a little puzzling because Christ is brought up. Now, what's going on here? Jesus has not been on the earth as a man before this time. The reader of Hebrews back then, Paul's letter, or Paul or whoever was the writer of Hebrews, they would have known. They could relate to who this Christ is. Christ was Jesus Christ. We can do the same. We certainly can today. But Moses knew nothing of Jesus. What did he know? He did know of the promise of redemption that God gave to Abraham and his descendants. And he knew of God's saving power. So he was looking ahead to a Messiah, to a future of redemption, without actually knowing about this Christ, this Jesus Christ of Nazareth. So let's move on and look at more choices Moses made. In verse 27 of the same Hebrews chapter 11, by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. So I'm convinced Moses was willing to be the deliverer for God's people. I mean, just by affiliating himself, avenging the mistreatment of a Hebrew person and killing an Egyptian, he's putting himself in that camp where he's a deliverer for God's people. However, we read here that by faith he left Egypt. So what gives? If he's going to be the deliverer, the one who's going to save the people from these years and years and generations of slavery, what gives that he leaves Egypt? We don't want to get confused here on the timing. This isn't referring to the time much later when he crosses the Red Sea and leaves with the people. This is him leaving alone, and definitely not as a deliverer. Why is he leaving? Partly is explained here in Exodus chapter 2, verse 13 through 15. This is the day following the day after Moses killed the Egyptian. Verse 13, the next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Apparently it was not a secret what Moses had done. So then we read, then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. Even more importantly, verse 15, when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian. So, Pharaoh, this was his one-time grandfather, is now wanting to kill Moses. This would be his reason to flee Egypt. Let's see again what the writer of Hebrews wrote. By faith he left Egypt. Moses left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger, the Pharaoh's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. So let's add another choice to our list. I would like to suggest to leave the familiar. Moses chose to leave the familiar. The familiar. He had a familiar life, definitely as the Pharaoh's grandson, and then he had a life beyond that, even taking on the Hebrew life until he is found out and is now becoming a wanted man. He could have pleaded for mercy. You could say he didn't have much of a choice, but that could have been a choice, pleading for mercy, or he could have started an uprising at the time. I'm sure there are a lot of the Hebrew folks would follow him if he was emancipating them or delivering them. But instead he left. He fled. He forsook Egypt. By the way, in case it seems a contradiction that it says he didn't fear the king's anger, I would say that it takes guts to take off, because he had committed a crime against the state and he was going to be hounded. He was going to be sought after, to be taken care of, not in a good way. Also think of the guts it took to leave a life you were familiar with. Remember, at first it was a privileged life. Now to go out into the unknown and fend for yourself. It would take vision, but as it says, he saw him who is invisible. So let's stop here with Moses fleeing from Egypt. Next week, we'll look at more choices Moses made. Some more choices Moses made. I think Abraham and Sarah got 3 installments. I think Moses is another heavyweight, and I think we'll give him 3 installments. So next week, we'll finish up with Moses' story. So in the meantime, take care, and may the Lord be with you.